Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Yes indeed, today I'm going to review a watch that is outstandingly well made, fabulous value for money, and offers a personalised buying experience that you just don't get too many other places, and certainly not for the price being charged. But I don't like it. It's a Helm Miyako. Now, if you are a long-term viewer of the channel, you know that I'm a massive fan of Helm watches. The Vanuatu has yet to be beaten in my eyes in the $300 diver category. And I've reviewed the Kuraburi and the Titanium Vanuatu very positively. Their 40mm diver, the Komodo, is an awesome watch, although maybe a bit too chunky for its own good in my opinion. But their newest design, the Miyako, has just never really struck a chord with me. I was never really a fan of the design. Now in fairness, the design is not really 100% Helm's. If the Blancpain 50 Fathoms and the JLC Polaris had a baby, it would look pretty much like the Helm Miyako. I always found it to be a little bit too fussy, a little bit too detailed for its own good. Perhaps therefore not quite as Helm as all the other Helms, if you see what I mean. But does that mean to say I don't recommend it? Does that mean that you shouldn't buy it? Of course not. It's still a fantastic watch, and if you like the look of it, then you should definitely pick one up. So here follows an overwhelmingly positive review of a watch that I have absolutely no intention of ever buying myself. Let's flip the camera and get on with it. But when you think about it, that's pretty much what reviewers do, isn't it? Critically analysing things that they may have no personal interest in. And that's kind of how I feel about this Helm. Big shout out, before I forget, to the one and only Mr. P. He picked up this Miyako just this week to complete his Helm set. He has a Kuraburi therefore, a Vanuatu, and he actually has both colourways of the Komodo. And by the way, he is a bigger fan of this one than I am so far. He is loving it. And what's not to love, really? As I mentioned in the intro, the Helm buying experience is second to none for the price they're charging. This one comes in at around $400, just over, by the time you pay for shipping. They even tell you which way up to open the package, and then you are showered with gifts such as stickers, a polishing cloth, and a personalised handwritten note to you from the brand owner Matt when you open the box. He's still a one-man band, and his handwriting hasn't changed, by the way, in the 5 years that I have been reviewing Helms. That is also his handwriting on the warranty card and the pressure testing card. He quality controls all of these watches himself and ensures they qualify for ISO 6425 ratings. All his watches come on a bracelet plus an additional nylon strap in the package. In this case, it's a standard NATO style. There are a bunch of different Helm branded straps and accessories available as extras, all at reasonable prices, very reasonable prices from their website as well. So what is a Helm Miyako then? Well, it's Helm's first attempt at a mid-century dress diver, but big and chunky like all the other Helms. That's probably how I would describe it anyway. I mean, it's definitely not achingly retro, but when you are taking a lot of cues from the 50 Fathoms, you're definitely locating yourself in the 1950s. There are a number of other more modern styling cues as well though. There's a touch of colour here and there, and there's a subtle yet noticeable great wave style pattern in the recessed centre section of the dial. This is Helm's most expensive watch to date, coming closer to $400 than to $300, and I believe it's their first watch to use a high-beat Miyota 9000 series movement rather than Seiko's 3Hz NH series movements. And it's the first Helm to have a fair number of high-polished surfaces dotted around it rather than their more customary all-brushed stainless steel look. So it's a Helm gym, but not as we know it. Perhaps that is therefore my issue with this one. There are 3 other models, all pretty similar really, all very tooly, all very dive focused. This one is clearly just as dive capable, it's certified like the others, and it feels like a Helm. But it perhaps doesn't quite look like a Helm. It's just as chunky as most of the others though, 40.5mm across the case, but 41.5mm in diameter effectively across the bezel. 13.5mm thick, and that is despite the switch to the much slimmer Miyota 9015. Lug to lug is pretty good though at 46.8. In terms of lug width, they've opted for the chunkier 22, and on this supplied bracelet sized up for me, this one was so box fresh, Mr. P hasn't even tried it on the bracelet himself yet. It weighs in at a not inconsiderable 179 grams. Case finish, as discussed, is a mixture of brushed and polished surfaces this time. The sides of the case bow outwards, kind of like an SKX, and there's a similar bow on the high polished coin edge bezel. Drilled lugs, by the way, definitely help getting this one on and off that bracelet. unsigned crown, another vintage Q 7mm with the helm logo. The upper lug surfaces are brushed, as is the entire bracelet, and you can see here the domed sapphire, both the crystal covering the dial and the bezel insert are made of scratch-proof glass. The bracelet is all 316L stainless steel, all brushed on the upper surfaces and polished on the sides. Solid male end links, solid links with screws. It's kind of oyster style, I suppose, but with a much broader centre link and two narrower outer links. I think this arrangement makes the bracelet look visually quite thick and heavy. Those big broad centre links really are pretty large. Unlike the clasp, for some reason Helm have chosen the smallest clasp that I've seen on a helm by some margin. Double triggers but no fold over, milled lower but only a pressed upper, and only 2 holes of micro adjust, so only 2 different adjustment positions are available therefore. More on that later. The case back is a little work of art though. They've replicated that wave pattern from the centre of the watch on the back of the watch, and it looks lovely. The raised helm logo in the middle is high polished just like the outer rim, and the obligatory specifications are etched between the holes drilled for getting the back off. Miyako 9015 as noted, 24 joule, hacking and hand winding 4Hz auto with a roughly 40-hour power reserve and stated tolerances of -10 to +15 seconds per day variants. Dial and hands. Now there is quite a lot going on here, so I'm going to start at the outer edges and work my way in today. There's a big old dome on that sapphire bezel insert for a start, with beaver's teeth triangles at the 0/60, minute markings until 15, and then just numerals on the 10s and batons on the 5s. I really like how the domed insert is framed by 2 concentric circles of high polish though. I think that looks awesome. Moving further in, we have an angled rehaut with circles on the 5s and slim dashes everywhere else. Further in still, we have the outer layer with a circular brush finish, which you can see from most angles. Now this layer features applied numerals at the 12, 3, 6 and 9 with black surrounds and a slightly creamy photinid paint fill. There are applied, clipped triangular indices elsewhere, again with black surrounds, and a rather interesting date complication. I guess the 3 and 6 were out of the question if they wanted to retain those numerals, so they squeezed it in at the 430 porthole style with a nicely angled edge. And in case you forget it's there, there's a small red triangle pointing to it. And one more layer in towards the pinion, there's a recessed centre section which features a fairly subtle great wave style etching. The helm logo is printed beneath the 12, divers with the all-important apostrophe, and the model name Miyako above the 6. The hour hand and the minute hand mimic the indices with those clipped tips, the hour hand sweeping to the outer edges of the recessed centre section, and the minute hand just touching the innermost edge of each applied marker. And just when you thought that was everything, check the second hand. It's an arrowhead / syringe tip combo with just another little splash of red, and on the back end it's a skeletonized lollipop counterbalance that does a pretty reasonable job of framing the H in the helm logo when it passes over the top of it. A lot of different components then, but with some subtle attempts to tie everything in together. The loom is typically helm awesome, initially at least. C3 old radium style to go with those 50s Qs, and plenty of it on the dial, the hands and the bezel insert. And for the first time, the helm logo, another really nice touch. Remember, this is a sub $400 US watch. When I speed it up though, there is always a bit of a price to be paid for the use of old radium style loom, and it does begin to fade across the board relatively quickly. The Arabics on the dial disappear first, which was a bit of a surprise, but there is still plenty of the hands and elsewhere, even at the end of my test. Overall, it's still pretty convincing. On wrist, well, let's have a look at it on both the NATO and the bracelet. I'm not sure this watch suits the NATO strap at all though. But then again, you know I'm not a fan of these things, so if you are, just ignore my comments and wear it how you like. It just takes a fairly ornate design with mid-century Qs and adds a chunk of military to it that doesn't really work in my opinion. Personally, I'd be going for vintage leather. Perhaps that's not a surprise to anybody though. The weight on the NATO is around 110 grams, so if you love the watch but aren't that keen on the weight, this gives you an idea of how much it would be on a lighter strap option. If you're okay with a chunk of weight on your wrist, then the bracelet is the one for you. The grey dial and black bezel with those mildly photinid hands and indices is a lovely, lovely colour combination, I think. And the wrist roll looks great because of the double domed sapphire. That is a very broad centre link though, which gives the watch a bulkier, more slabby look than it might otherwise have had if those 3 links had been more evenly sized. Now with the pocket shop for this one, you can see some lovely light play again from all of that sapphire, but because of the lack of micro adjustment, I'm forced to wear this one looser than I would really have wanted to. So lots to like then. It is very well executed, it's solidly manufactured, I mean it still feels like a helm, but overall, am I convinced by this watch? What are my moans and niggles? Well, I'm unconvinced by this bracelet and clasp arrangement. I think given how much high polish there is on the watch, high polish mid-links perhaps would not have looked out of place. I never thought I would hear myself lobbying for more high polish on a dive watch, but it might have suited this one better. And as discussed, those broad links all really do accentuate the watch's heft. And the clasp is just not good. The upper is thin and pressed and just too small, and it doesn't feature enough micro adjustment, especially when micro adjustment is so important for a heavy watch like this, and there are some sharp edges too, so overall, yeah, just not a fan of the bracelet. And the relatively short lug to lug means a super tiny gap between the spring bars and the case. This is going to undoubtedly restrict strap options with this one. Super thick NATOs are out, and any straps with big bulky ends are out as well. Maybe a little work could have been done to the case, a little chamfer to allow for a bit more room here. So we're in a tricky situation now. I don't think the bracelet quite works with the watch, and it's going to be a struggle for your average strap to fit on the watch also. And the bezel action is a tricky one to call. 120 click unidirectional, incredibly firm and precise feeling, it sounds great as well, but really rather difficult to operate because of the shape of the bezel, that bow to it, and because it's high polish. It lacks any substantial grip therefore. As I said in the intro, the styling just doesn't quite work for me. I do like bits of it, the domed sapphire, domed bezel insert combo, and those two high polished concentric rings all work really well together for me, but I'm just not as into other bits of it. The logo, for example, sits a little too close to the pinion for my eye, and I don't find those numerals particularly attractive at the 12, 3, 6 and 9. Maybe I would have preferred it if they'd just gone for triangular batons instead. Oh, and of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention the sucker punch with all helms. If you like it and you want it, I hope you're patient, because there are probably around 4,000 people in front of you in the queue for one of these already. I believe they make around 150 a month. As I said, Matt Quality controls all of them himself, so chances are you're going to be waiting several years for your Miyako. I think perhaps that part of my issue is, to me anyway, a helm should look like this. It should look like the Vanuatu. It should be legible, it should be simple, it should be stark, and it should be tooly. And the Miyako isn't really any of those things, well, not to a great degree. Perhaps in actual fact, if the watch had a different brand name on the dial, I might be more into it. That's how sick I am. But you get it, I'm sure. You come to know a brand for what they do best and expect more of the same from them. This is kind of a departure from their normal stuff, stylistically at least, although they can or don't seem to want to get away from the 180 gram weight, no matter what the style of watch they're putting out. Perhaps after 5+ years of more of the same, it's just going to take me a while to get used to something different from the company. Or perhaps I'll just continue to buy my Thule hardcore dive watches from Helm and my mid-century retro pieces from another brand that excels at and is known for making mid-century retro pieces. So there you have it. Well made, great value. I'm still not convinced by the way this one looks. Personally, I'll be sticking with their more Thule offerings. If you would like to see me review their more Thule offerings, why not click here or here. Thanks for watching this one. I will see you all again in a future video, I hope.